So let's talk about occupational gender segregation. This is part 3 of the video, and I said this term was going to be really important here. I've got lots to say. All right, so what does it mean, first of all? So when sociologists talk about occupational gender segregation, what we're talking about is how men and women are sorted into different jobs, how they sort and are sorted. And I would remind you too that structure and agency are going to be in play here, that men and women choose which job to go into, but that choice is going to be constrained and enabled by different social structures that they exist in. Think about their access to education, their family, their social class. All of these things are going to impact their choices. All right, so men and women are sorted into different jobs. Why does it matter, though? Well, here's some evidence. Here's some of the stuff that we know. Jobs that are male dominated, meaning that there's more men in the field, those are the jobs that are paid more, whereas jobs that are female dominated are paid less. So maybe some jobs come to mind. Male dominated jobs are in the STEM fields. They're the science, technology, engineering, math type of jobs. We see more men in those jobs than women. Female dominated careers are generally the caregiving careers. So we see that in terms of nurses, teachers, healthcare workers, educators, teachers, and then childcare providers. These are all lower paid jobs. Women also tend to be concentrated in lower paid industries and firms. So even in jobs that are typically paid more, like law, lawyer jobs, women are concentrated in specific firms or fields within that job that are paid less. So for example, sociology is more female dominated now. It used to be a more male dominated field in education, and it was paid, it used to be paid more. And that's something that we see too. As jobs become more female dominated, the average pay decreases here. There's some interesting examples here. Let's see, that wages in biology and design used to be higher when the fields were more predominantly male. As more women became biologists and designers, the pay dropped. Whereas the opposite has happened in computing. The earliest programmers were female, and today it's a really predominantly male job and field, and it's one of the most highly paid. One idea is that as jobs become more female dominated, the fields are feminized, that men start to avoid those fields, and because fields associated with women have been culturally devalued. So women really have more to gain in terms of status entering those male dominated careers than men have in entering female dominated careers. And so the last point here is that the STEM fields, like I said before, they are male dominated and they pay more. So we're going to focus a little bit on these STEM fields. So when does occupational segregation start? Well, it might start earlier than you think. So plenty of research documents that there's no difference between boys and girls' mathematical abilities. And you can look at this link on the PowerPoint. It's links to an article that will link to a original research. So there's previously been some schools of thought that boys are simply smarter than girls when it comes to certain things. And that's generally been disproven. People have different abilities, and oftentimes these abilities are linked to social class as well, because kids in higher social classes have more resources. They're given more opportunities. But anyways, so here's the source here, citing my source here. The study that was done last year it was published last year by Ray, Boda, and Stradfeld in Sweden, a study that was done in Sweden. They are looking at high schoolers and looking at how friend influence and peer exposure widen the STEM gender gap. So not only are we talking about your career now as an adult, but we're talking about the stuff that starts in high school. So one thing that we know is that women have a higher rate of dropping out of STEM educational tracks and occupations, which is part of this widening of the gender gap. And so STEM fields have this really relatively strict pathway. I'm going to talk about that in a well, I'll talk about that here. So there's the idea of the pipeline is used here because STEM career paths require a relatively strict path that start relatively early. It doesn't mean that you can't like suddenly become a biology major in college when you were originally going to be something that's non-biology related. But these interests often start early. In high school, I don't know what the requirements are now for you all. I remember we had to take like a biology and a chemistry course. We had to take a certain number of sciences, certain number of math, certain number of English, and blah, blah, blah. And so these interests are developed early on. Your skills are developing early on, and then in college, of course, you got to pick that major. So these folks are looking at what's happening in high school, and in terms of of people's friends and who they're exposed to. And they're calling it the leaky pipeline because they're seeing women essentially dropping out of this, and so this is part of the widening of the gender gap here. Gender differences in performance, so that idea of human capital, remember back to last week, they don't explain the reason why women drop out at a higher rate than men. It's not that like, oh, men are smarter here, so that's why the men are staying in and the women are dropping out. Nope, that doesn't explain it. There's no differences there. All right, so why is the leaky pipeline happening? So here's what they're saying. So they found two really big important findings here. So first it has to do with friend influence. And the main idea here is that your favorite subject in school, remember, talking about high school, is affected by your friend's favorite subject. But they found that this works differently for boys and girls. So they found that boys are more likely to have a STEM subject as their favorite subject than girls. So first of all, that's the first idea. And boys are more likely to have close friends who are boys, so they have greater social influence to lean towards STEM. And what the researchers did here, they looked at this longitudinally, at least 2 data points here in high school, looking at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. So they're looking at how things are changing. And so one of their findings there is how students' interests develop over the school year and how their peers are influential there. So again, this idea that boys are already initially more likely to have a STEM subject as their favorite subject. This might be due to their exposure of toys, to their parent influence, to their other types of socialization. We looked at TV shows. And then they're more likely to have close friends who are boys than girls having close friends who are boys. And so there's that power of the social influence to lean towards STEM because of those 2 things. The second big finding here is what they call peer exposure. So the other students that you're exposed to, not necessarily your friends, but who's around you. So peer exposure has to do with your classmate peers' preferences. So girls tend to retain their STEM preferences when other girls in their classroom also like STEM. So what this has to do, what this is implying here is about gender norms in the classroom. And so because girls are less likely to have a STEM preference, that makes them, if they do have a STEM preference, that makes them deviant. See how we're pulling all these different ideas together here? And so it makes them deviant. But if a lot of other girls in their class also like STEM, it makes them less deviant, which makes them like feel better, essentially, that they feel like they fit in more when more people like what they like. In terms of the STEM field. So girls tend to keep STEM as their favorite rather than changing it when the other girls in their class also like STEM. So this is a really interesting finding here in terms of how norms work at the group level here. And so peer exposure to other girls who like STEM can be a protective buffer for girls who like STEM, and can prevent and protect girls from social sanctioning from this non-gender conforming behavior. All right, so here's some data here. So this has to do again with this idea of the pipeline. So what we're seeing here, we're looking at estimated median base pay. We're looking at college majors. The title of the chart here, the graph. Men sort into college majors that end up paying more. So this is kind of the halfway point here. Percentage of men in college majors. So jobs that are over here on the right side, these are fields that have more men, and jobs that are over here on the left side, these are majors that have more women. Again, this is base pay, so this is like what you're, ideally you graduate college, you get a job, this is what they're paying you. And so we can see here, if it was equal, if it was equal pay, this line here would be flat. That there wouldn't be any difference in pay. But what we're seeing here is that as jobs or college majors, because that's what each of these little dots represent, college majors have more men, they are, the slope of the line goes up, they are more likely to be paid more. Let's see. So we can see what these, again, here we have the engineering jobs, physics, and then we've got here more in the middle here in terms of folks in the job, marketing, criminal justice, and then some, slightly more women in accounting, nursing is more female dominated and more higher paid than these other jobs here. Again, base pay, median base pay. So the conclusion here to part 3, thinking about occupational gender segregation, is it's not just, we can't just look at folks when they're already in their jobs, but that these things are starting not only in college, but they're starting earlier. They're starting in high school. And our choices, remember, our agency is influenced by structure. It's enabled by structure, but it's also constrained by structure. And these decisions, these influences are happening early in life, in high school, in college, and they're affecting our life outcomes. All right, next it's time to move to part 4.